Good morning and welcome to my YouTube channel. So today I thought I would actually go back to basics. I'm actually very surprised I haven't already done this video. But basically I just wanted to go over some best practices. Basically, I wanted to share what I've learned over, a 20-25 year career of developing hundreds and hundreds of databases and taking over other people's work and trying to, fix issues, improve performance, things like that. And just trying to avoid any novice users, developers, falling into common pitfalls that will lead to nothing but pain. So basically, this is a guide that more or less these are what I implement typically on any system. Of course, like everything else, you take this all with a grain of salt. You are your own commander-in-chief and you make your own choices. But what I'm putting out here, like I say, are pretty much well-known best practices followed by most of the top-level Access developers. Some might be debatable, but for the vast majority, these are hard, steadfast best practices. So let's just dive in. I've tried to break them down a little bit. So let's look at the general stuff. Well, general stuff is going to be more implementation, setup, things like that. Just general understanding of a database system. Now, with Access, Microsoft sets you off on the wrong foot right from day one because they create a single database file. And if you're going to create a database, one of the first things you should be doing is actually splitting it into a front end and a back end. Now, that being said, once you've split the database, to improve performance, you should then be implementing a persistent connection between the front end and the back end. So it's basically a handshake between the two that is never let go. That way, when you have to do things, it's much faster. If you don't have a persistent connection, every time you go and open a table, a form, whatever, it has to go and reconnect, validate permissions, all these things. And then it allows you to do what you have to do. And then when you close it, it lets go of that connection. So then you go to the next thing and I got to go and do my connection again. So instead, you create a persistent connection that never closes. And therefore, the first instance obviously has to go through that process, but every subsequent request that you make no longer does because it stays there and it's always available and active. Then there's the golden rule of development. Always develop using the oldest version of Access that your users will be running. So, concrete example, you've got users running 2016, some running 2021, some on 365. You have to be running in 2016 for your development. You always, always, always develop in the oldest version that any user will ever use to open and work with your system. So if you're on 365 and your users are in 2010, you're asking for trouble. You will have trouble. So you need to be developing in 2010, just like your users. Moving over, if you're going to do development, you never do development over a network. Okay, you copy the files that you need locally onto your local machine. You do your development locally. When you're done, then you copy it back over to the server for the rest of the users to have. And if that means you have to take the database offline, then so be it. If you do development over a network, you're going to have major speed issues or potential speed issues, and you also risk corruption. I put it here, save regularly. You never know when problems happen, especially I find more and more recent versions when you're doing development, you make a boo-boo and suddenly it just crashes and you've just lost 4 hours of work because you didn't save. So save as you go along, and goes hand in hand with backups. Because corruption happens, things happen, you go back 5 steps, you go forward 10 steps, and the next thing you know, I should have kept that version from 2 hours ago because it was much better. Well, if you had a backup, and you do regular backups, it's not an issue. You just delete what you're working on, bring your backup for an hour or two ago, and you're back up and running. When it comes to final production deployment to your users, I highly recommend you always deploy it as an ACCDE. Don't give users the ability to go and make changes, design changes, and mess around with things, your code. I've seen it too many times, and you get one power user that thinks he knows better, or, oh, I just wanted to check this, and the next thing you know, your data has been all compromised. They've changed fundamental things, reporting isn't right. It's just lock it down. And you have access to the ACCDB, but users have the ACCDE, the lockdown version. And yeah, if you're doing development, you want to set yourself up in a smart manner for development. So you need some way of having your own internal, whether it be release notes or update history. You need to come up with a system that works for you. It can be integrated, like I say here, database version history. I can use tables in my databases, both in the front end and the back end. You can use Word documents, Excel spreadsheet, whatever works for you. But just have a system to keep track of what changed where, who made that request in the first place, because I've had that happen. Why was this changed? Because you asked me to do it 8 months ago. Here's the email. Ooh. So you need to keep track of not only what was changed, but who made these requests. And that's basically just a high level, just general stuff. Now, if we start getting into more specifics, let's look at access level settings. So this isn't a database specific. This is, you should do this on access to improve overall performance, avoid potential corruption, things like that. And the three that quickly come to mind is don't use compact and close. Okay. You should never need to compact and close a database every single time. Okay. Compaction, you should be able to control, and it shouldn't need to be run that frequently ever. If your database bloats that much and it needs to be compacted every single time, that is indicative of design issues. The way the database has been designed, the table structures, queries, the code, and that's what needs to be addressed. Compacting every day is just camouflaging the real issue, the root of the problem. Also very well known for decades now, it's been highly recommended to turn off track name autocorrect. So you just uncheck that and you don't have to worry about it anymore. Also, to try to minimize, to a certain extent, database bloating, unless there is a particular reason to have it, make sure you disable the record level locking. It will cause bloating. Moving on, table specific. Well, you're going to see some of this stuff comes back over and over and over. Some of it is truly specific to tables. But you should, in general, be turning off at the table level when you're doing your design, the sub-data sheet name, and set it to none. Okay. Don't use attachments. Don't use hyperlinks. And whatever you do, do not use multi-valued fields. Okay. The lookup wizards. You want multi-value fields, well then create your own. Use the proper technique, create a child table with the proper relationship and build it yourself. So you're in control completely from table design to whatever queries or row sources you use where you can apply your own ordering and sort and whatever. Do not use this. Don't use anything like this that is basically, smoke and mirrors, and you don't know what's happening behind the scenes and you don't have full control. It also is an issue when you need to upsize. So just stay away from this type of stuff. Hyperlinks, once again, there's no reason for it. They cause problems. You're much better just having a plain text field, just like with attachments where you store a path and you use a file dialog, allow the user to go pick the path, the file, whatever, store it as plain text, and then you, through your form, can still provide 100% the same functionality, but it's A, won't lead to bloating of your database, and B, you remain in full control. Attachments, just a horrible, horrible idea. Don't go down that path. The only time I will agree to attachments is for things like simple icons, and that will be a very limited usage scenario, 10, 20 max. And then I'm using small, minuscule image files, 1 kilobyte, 3 kilobytes for icons on buttons. But that is it. But if you want to start stocking in words, PDF, big images, photos, don't do it. Okay, I have a link here to how to do it properly. Yeah, obviously you're going to see this one keep coming back. Don't use special characters. It just leads to problems when you need to do coding, when you need to do, anyway, your queries, everything. It's just hand in hand. So don't use special characters, and that includes spaces. So you're much better off, like I say here, use camel case when you're naming your table fields. And then there's this whole issue of reserved words. Basically, these are all words that are used internally in Access, in VBA, in SQL, that you should not be using to name your, whether it be fields, tables, forms, whatever. So let's think of SQL. So a simple select statement. Well, you shouldn't be going and naming a field in your table select. Okay. And there are thousands of such words. I have a link here where you can gain access to a tool to help you with that. And Alan Brown also had a page on his website. So yeah, avoid those words at all costs for naming anything in your database. Don't use input masks. Don't use captions. And people are floored at me when I say that. Well, sadly, captions override query aliases. Going to be a big problem later on when you want to rename a column and you can't. Yeah, take the time to properly index your fields. So any field that you're going to be searching on, typically you should be applying an index to, and this will help with performance. However, you don't want to go index every field, because then that slows down other operations such as inserts and updates and things like that. So it's a balancing act. But typically the rule of thumb is you look at all your queries and things like that, and you look at which ones am I going to be applying some type of where clause or having clause. You're going to filter on those fields. Well, if we're going to apply filters to them, we probably should be indexing them. That's just a general rule of thumb. There are obviously exceptions, but that's a good rule of thumb in general. Obviously, also, you ensure the integrity of your data. You want to also be applying the required property when appropriate. But if you know that this needs to be there or else everything downstream is going to fall apart, well, then make sure it is a required field. Don't allow people to put in half entries into your records into tables. Incomplete. Make sure that they are required fields and that they'll be rejected by the database if it isn't filled in. Obviously, you will then want to go on and develop your form properly to give clear messages to your users and simplify the data entry process. But at the table level, also, do what you need to do. Obviously, once you've built your tables, then go and set up your relationships. This will simplify other development such as queries and form development that flows, downstream from the tables. When you're linking tables, whenever possible, you want to be using UNC or direct IP driven paths. It will help accelerate the linking and communication, etc., rather than using map drives. Okay. Moving on to forms. Well, here we're back at it. Don't use special characters and avoid reserved words. You're going to see this keep coming back. Basically, it applies to everything throughout a database. Once again, don't use input masks. And what I write here is true. Typically, they cause more problems than they actually solve. Yeah, in a general sense, you don't want to use ActiveX controls, okay? You may think they provide functionality. Typically, you can do without. I know people have shown me systems where they had ActiveX barcode systems. and then they had problems with them and they couldn't get the company. And long story short, it's just a world of pain. And what's the solution? I was able to replace everything, not needing any ActiveX, not needing any proprietary software, and not having to pay a penny. So most ActiveX can be completely replaced with alternatives. If you absolutely need to have it, so be it, but try to minimize ActiveX controls as much as you can. And here you go once again. If you have to use images, like I said, I don't use attachments. I will store paths. The same would be true in a form or a report. You can have a path, even if it's through VBA, and just load images dynamically. But if you are going to go and put images directly in some object, a form report, then be sure to take the time to reduce the size of the images. Okay, you don't need a 12 meg image if it's going in the top right hand corner and going to be a 1/4 inch by a 1/4 inch. Okay, so you have to get the software and resize the image, reduce the resolution, and that 12 meg image could come down to, let's say, 10 kilobytes. And then you use that in your form or report. And then I'd also say, let's say if we're talking about something like a logo, one of the better approaches, if you're going to do that, is you create a form or a report, whatever, where you put that logo just in there, and that's all that's in the report, and you resize the report to the size of the image. And then now you've got basically a form or report with the logo, and now you can insert that into every single other form or report. And now you only have the image once in your database versus inserting that logo into 20 different reports and making your database bloat 20 times. By having it in one and just reusing it, inserting it as a sub report or a sub form, you only have one instance of it in reality. So it only bloats it one time. The other advantage is if you need to update it, you now only have to update one location rather than 20. So it's, you have to work smart, not harder, you work smarter. Then we'll move on to macros. I am an staunch, I avoid macros like the plague. I don't use macros except for, like I say here, auto exec, auto keys, things like that. They are not worth the trouble. They're a pain to work with. They're a pain to troubleshoot. They're a pain to get proper error handling in, so users can get and understand when there are issues. And a macro, embedded macro, same thing. Avoid them, don't use them. Do yourself a favor, go straight to VBA, that's where your power is. Then you get into VBA. Make sure you always put the option explicit. And you can do that in your VBE, you have options. Put that option and it's always required. Okay, it will save you a lot of hassle in the long run. While you're working, compile regularly. Make sure there are no problems in your VBA. Then also, you see this, some people, they'll open a form and then they see an issue. They'll go into VBA when the form's still open. They'll start making changes and then things can crash. You can lose your work. It's just don't work that way. If you need to make changes to a form or a report, then switch into design mode. That way it doesn't risk crashing nearly as much. And obviously save. And we're back to the never use reserved words again. And like I say here, I've got my reserved word checker if ever you just want to take a peek at it. It's a very simple utility. It will run through your objects looking for, it has a list of all of the reserved words that I could find, and it will then spit out what it has found. So as you can see here, it has found these different things. It found the word left. You shouldn't use that. Left is, well, a property and things like that. So these are just different things here, like you see here, insert. Well, we use that in SQL, so we shouldn't be using that in our database ourselves. I have a video on the matter, and if you look here, here are the sources of where I got all the listings of reserved words, and you got to commend, in reality, probably 95% of it came from Alan Brown. So, this is the place, he he did so much for the Access community. Truly sad that he's no longer involved, but a website, a resource that is unparalleled. So I took that plus everything else I could find in other sources and compounded them into a table that is part of the database. So if you download this, there's a table with all of the reserved words I could locate. And that's what's used to validate all the objects and try to identify potential sources of problem. Once you get this listing, then you can go and, rename things and update things. And there are different approaches for that. We won't get into that today. But that basically sums up, what I consider to be the best practices as it stands today. This will keep you out of a lot of trouble, avoid you a lot of pain moving forward. Sometimes people, multi-value, it's so simple, quick and simple, and then they start down that path. And then it's not until a year or 2 years later, we want to upsize, and suddenly, bam, well, you've got a real problem now, don't you? So, yeah, same thing with attachments. The number of people that have approached me with databases that suddenly are hitting the 2 gigabyte because they've added attachments is just sickening. And there are countless threads and forums pertaining to this. And it always comes back to attachments. So offload attachments, you shouldn't have them in a database anyway. You have them in a folder. You simply store as plain text in your database the path and file name. And you can still give full ability to view them, to update. All of that can still be done 100%. But you won't be bloating and impacting the size, and therefore it also, a bigger database, longer to load, longer to do certain actions with, keeping it plain text, keeping your database minimal, you're optimizing it for performance. So there's so much here. But if you put these into practice, you will avoid a lot of troubles, and you'll have a better streamlined experience. Your users will have a better streamlined experience. And you look just simply more professional. So, I'm going to stop there. I'm rambling on now at this point. And I'm going to wish you all a great day. And if you don't mind, like, share, subscribe. It costs you nothing, but it makes a world of difference as far as I am concerned. That is how you are able to repay me for my time invested in creating these articles and making these videos. So, wishing you all a great day, and we'll see you in the next one.